And as the member for North Ayrshire and Arran, I am delighted to participate in this debate, although I wish it wasn't necessary. It does have a pressing relevance, not just to the members in the constituents of those in the North East, but also has a very pressing relevance to my own constituents, particularly those living in the island of Arran and the island of Cumbrae. Those who have the great pleasure, Mr Chair, of living on these islands, like a million other consumers across Scotland, face the challenges of coping with these very unfair delivery surcharges, late delivery, or even excluded from delivery services altogether when they shop online. And we can't be under any illusion that this is more than an inconvenience. It has a genuine and negative impact on rural businesses as well as consumers. Citizens Advice research tells us that the size of the UK parcels market has grown by over 50% since 2010, and much of this growth, as we can imagine, is driven by parcels sent to consumers from online shopping. Now, the Scottish Parliament Information Centre has costed additional parcel delivery surcharges at around £38 million per year to Scottish consumers compared to the rest of the UK. And this is completely unacceptable, with a shocking £11.4 million of that spent over the Christmas period by consumers simply because of where they live. Yet despite a fair delivery charges campaign, these figures are rising. And these rises come at a time when more and more of us shop online for a whole variety of reasons, and this is evidently and of necessity the case for those living in rural areas. Yet some of us pay what can only be described as a postcode tax, which is often imposed randomly and by some but not all retailers. These charges are discriminatory and hit both consumers and rural businesses in fragile areas very hard indeed. And the problem for my constituents and other rural constituents is deeply concerning. This penalising for delivery of goods bought online, this consumer exclusion is such that some 10.9% of retailers exclude some Scottish islands from a delivery service altogether. Now, the Statement of Principles on parcel deliveries has had little effect on this. The UK Statement of Principles is designed to assist retailers in their policies on the delivery of goods purchased over the internet by individual consumers, and it sets out best practice principles as to how retailers can ensure their delivery services meet the needs of their consumers. And this UK-wide Statement of Principles builds upon the Scottish guidelines launched in November 2013. And the principles have arisen following agreement between representatives of both the UK and Scottish Government, online retailers, parcel delivery operators and consumer organisations. And the logic is that companies following the course of actions outlined in the principles would be helpful in ensuring the UK parcels delivery market works in the interests of consumers and businesses. Yet the last time I checked, and perhaps the Minister has got more recent figures, but the last time I checked, only 4 businesses out of 449 have even heard of these principles. There is no doubt that the UK Government needs to use the coming into force, the Consumer Rights Act, to support business education about the requirements under the Consumer Contract Regulations. And there also needs to be support for consumer education about what information consumers should be provided with and about the minimum standards defined in the Consumer Contract Regulations. Now, the principles that we talked about earlier were designed to secure a better, fairer deal for consumers in our rural areas. But, of course, in my view, not enough work was done to increase delivery operator and retailer buy-in to these principles with a plan of action to promote the scheme. Now, as far as islands are concerned, there is no doubt that in Scotland the Scottish Government's road equivalent tariff ferry fare structure should have helped to reduce costs of delivering goods to islands such as Arran and Cumbrae. But I'm afraid it seems that these reduced costs have not been passed on to consumers. So more work must be undertaken with delivery operators for our rural and island consumers across Scotland. And we need to ensure that these rural customers, both on islands and in rural areas, can access a full range of delivery options, whether that be from the local post office, their local shop, or any other place convenient to the consumer, which may reduce costs. Now, the Scottish Government has done all it can on this issue with the very limited powers it has, as was pointed out by the member for Caithness, Sutherland and Easter Ross. But not a great deal has changed in reality. The Scottish Government unveiled its Fairer Deliveries for All plan to protect rural consumers and businesses and empower online shoppers to recognise and act upon unfair and misleading delivery costs. And of course, the Scottish Government working on a voluntary code is important. But the real power to put this matter right lies with the UK Government, and it needs to act. It needs to use its powers to regulate and do the right thing. Our rural consumers and businesses need you to do this, need the Government to do this, so that they can access a fair deal. I want a better deal for my island constituents on Arran and Cumbrae and for rural consumers right across Scotland and the UK. That is why I support a People's Delivery Guarantee, which pulls together all aspects of delivery charges and guarantees to ensure that consumers are getting the fair deal they deserve and are not misled by claims of free delivery, only be told during and after purchase that this is in fact not the case. Now, I know the Minister might well tell us today that the Advertising Standards Authority has launched a crackdown on misleading claims about rural delivery charges to consumers, and this was launched last year, but this has not really delivered the kind of change that rural communities need. I will indeed.
The Honourable Lady giving way, and I understand her argument and how more can be done, but I did give concrete examples of where the ASA are taking action, and I think when a company receives an enforcement notice we should at least recognise the fact that this is now happening, which hasn't been happening in recent months and years.
I'm aware that the Honourable Member mentioned that, but my point is that we have the Standards Authority, the Advertising Standards Authority, launching these initiatives about cracking down, as they call it, on this practice. But my point is that there's real change has not come about, the kind of real change that I know he and I would hope to see. 1 million consumers in Scotland, in rural Scotland, face punitive surcharges, and this has to stop. There must be a better and greater dialogue between the UK Government and the delivery operators. And this Government can regulate these charges, and it should. Concrete and decisive action is needed to ensure that consumers in large areas of Scotland do not face higher delivery charges or even have their orders refused. I first spoke out on this issue 4 years ago, weeks after I was first elected, and in that time I have seen the Scottish Government doing what it can to improve a bad situation over which it has no real power. This Parliament, this Government has the power to deliver the fairness, the inclusion that is needed. I urge the Minister to use her good offices to finally, at long last, to deliver that change. Self-regulation, for the most part, has failed, and I really hope that we're not debating this injustice 4 years from now. We know what the issue is, we know it can be remedied, so I really would hope that we can stop endlessly debating this issue and act instead. It really is time that my constituents on Arran and Cumbrae and rural consumers right across Scotland and the UK are no longer disadvantaged by this postcode tax.